Well, it's so great to see all of you here without your overcoats. It's great. I have to confess, I did practice for about 4 months with an overcoat on before I came here today. And then Gary sent me a contract that said the heat will be guaranteed, which I've never received in a contract before. This is a new program for me, and I just thought, my whole life I've just been wanting to see what it feels like to play two of my absolute favorite French composers back to back like this. And let me tell you, it is really, really difficult because they're so different. And what I'd like to do today is ask you to experiment a little bit with me in and giving me some response. So at the end of the concert, after you applaud wildly and everything, whatever, I'm gonna come back out and I'd like to talk to some of you if you wanna stay. I'd love to ask some opinions of the audience, because I really respect, your feelings about not only the program, but also what you're hearing. And, Claude Debussy was born in Saint-Germain-en-Laye in France in 1862, and he died in 1918. He was 13 years older than Ravel. So when Ravel was born, he was 0, of course, and Claude was 13. And Ravel was born in Saint-Jean-de-Luz. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's really down there at the bottom, and it's in the Basque country. And he was born in 1875, and he died in 1937. So he outlived Debussy by almost 20 years. And you have just heard the two most famous pieces. You all probably have heard Clair de Lune. I call it Clair de Lunatic, but anyway. And Pavane, right? Those are very famous pieces. Just as a show of hands, it's hard for me to see, but how many of you responded more to Pavane or to Clair de Lune? So who really loved the Pavane? Can I see? Very nice. Okay, and what about Clair de Lune? Can I see? All right, so a few more hands were up. The reason I think, for me, the two pieces are so different, I just played them in memory of my mother and my aunt, who were very different. And I'm not going to tell you which was which, but one of them was sort of more personal and warm, and the other one was a little cooler. But they loved me nevertheless, and I got a lot of support from both of them. And my mother lived till 100, and my aunt just passed away on the 22nd of February at 99. So they're long-lived, and I'm in big trouble because, you know, my savings are going to have to last quite a bit longer. But I think that the Debussy is more subjective. You get more feeling from it somehow. It's more oozy and lovey and all of that. And Ravel's music is different. His music is so full of feeling. I mean, every time I play that Pavane, tears are welling up because the feelings are so deep and they're really inside. So they're not like, you know, oh, I love you, baby, oh, honey, please. You know, none of that. It's all very contained, like, oh, yes, I care for you greatly. You know, it's more of that restrained feeling. So I'm going to take you through another 2 couplets. So you're not going to clap in between, as you notice I didn't let you. The next couplet that you see in your program are 2 Spanish pieces that they wrote. And if you notice in your program, every single piece that I'm playing has a title in it, right? And this is because both Ravel and Debussy were really in the middle of that Impressionist movement. And so they were trying to capture, also using music, these ideas that painters were trying to get on the canvas. Like painters were obsessed with water, you know, and they were obsessed with light. And musicians were not that different, and writers also were the same. So here you have Ravel and Debussy in the next 2 pieces writing something with a Spanish flavor. Now, neither of them ever went to Spain. And I don't know if you remember this, but I think the last time I saw you, I mentioned that Ravel wasn't a French guy, although many of you may have thought he was. He's actually Swiss and Basque, whereas Debussy is French. So in a sense, you know, Ravel's habanera, do you guys know what an habanera is? Do you know the most famous one is, so in these next 2 pieces, you're going to hear that same rhythm, you know, the da, 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 da. And one of them is a vocalise, which is meant to be sung with no words. And Ravel composed that in 1907 as part of a kind of exam during one of his Paris Conservatory times. You know, they sometimes will say, well, now in 10 minutes you have to write a vocalise. So this is what he wrote. And then Debussy wrote in 1913, La Puerta del Vino, the wine gate. Now we live in a wine country, so you know what that means. And it comes from a book of preludes. He wrote 2 books of preludes, and each prelude has a name, and this one is called La Puerta del Vino. Now, the 2 of them were very good friends with Manuel de Falla, who was a very, very well-known composer, and he actually said that he couldn't believe how authentic these guys could sound, even though they weren't Spanish. And Ravel's best friend during his Paris Conservatory years was a guy named Ricardo Viñas, whose mother was Spanish, and she and Mama Ravel would hang out all the time waiting for their 2 sons at the Paris Conservatory to finish school, and they would chatter away in Spanish and enjoy each other's company greatly because Mama Viñas didn't speak French, so she felt very lonely. And then Mama Ravel said, well, I speak French because she was raised in the Basque country, and so they hung out together. So I want you to listen to these 2 side by side again, and then you can close your eyes if you feel like it, you know, take a nap, but basically see which one you think is more authentic, and then you'll tell me later at the end of the concert. This is not a competition. I just want you to see if you can hear the difference between these 2. Okay? So we're going to do 2 habaneras. The first one is by Ravel, and the second one is by Claude Debussy. They're both great pieces. I mean, everything I'm playing today, I'm just in love with it, so it's my pleasure. So one of the things that happened during the, quote, Impressionist period, which none of the painters liked that word Impressionism, nor did composers, but it got a little bit stuck, was that everyone was really obsessed with water. And Debussy wrote several water pieces in the piano solo literature. One of them is Reflections in the Water, Reflets dans l'eau, and Cathédrale engloutie, which is fabulous. And you're going to hear later on also Jardin sous la pluie, Gardens in the Rain. And Ravel, he composed Jeu d'eau, which is about a fountain, Une barque sur l'océan, which is about a boat on the ocean that nearly capsizes, that you will hear on the second half. And the two of them were constantly being compared to each other, and it was very unfortunate because they liked each other a lot. And Ravel really admired Debussy. You know, Debussy was a giant He had won the Prix de Rome. He went to Rome. He was, celebrated for his opera, for La Mer. I mean, he was truly, really a unique voice. And so Ravel was very, very enamored by Debussy's music. And Debussy also was curious in looking at the younger Ravel and saying, this is a real talent. We should keep our eye on him. But as usual, the media got involved. Surprise, surprise. And they said, Ravel is just a kind of cheap version of Debussy. He's a Debussyite. And, poor Maurice just had to suffer through all these comparisons. And if you look at the pieces and the dates, they're kind of composed around the same period, so it's kind of easy to compare, which is why today I asked you not to compare them, but just to listen to them. And, I recently I was having dinner last night with the Gills, sort of really wonderful, dear friends. And we were talking about going to the Legion of Honor, and I always go because I was almost a double major in art and music at Yale. And I'm fascinated by the differences between Monet and Manet. And then we looked at the Manet and the Berthe Morisot. And it's so easy to just say, oh, they're all kind of, they're fuzzy, But it's not true. If you really start to look at them more carefully, you'll realize that Monet never used black. Manet used black. When you look at Manet and Morisot, you see that Manet's more outlined and everything, and then Morisot is more subtle. She doesn't give you outlines. And the same is true for Debussy and Ravel. They're not one and the same. And I'm really hoping after this concert that you will go home and listen to everything that they wrote, and you'll realize they're not the same. So one of the things that happened in the Impressionist phase was the Japanese went through a very, very long period of isolation called the Meiji period. And when they emerged from it, it was just the most incredible thing. It was like a butterfly coming out of this deep sleep. And one of the first things that the French saw at the exhibitions in 1898, at the Paris exhibition, were these incredible woodblock prints by Hiroshige and Hokusai. The big wave, those big waves, and then the tiny little boat there. And the perspective was so shocking because this was transformative, mostly you have these pictures of the family and, the cat is down there. But this was the big wave and a tiny boat. And it took Paris by storm, these woodcuts, because nobody had ever had that perspective put in front of them. And recently, I think one of those Hiroshiges went for like 23 million or something. I saw that Sotheby's was, I was hoping it would be cheaper, but anyway, Ravel and Debussy were absolutely, really enamored by this. And in fact, in the second half, you'll hear in Debussy especially that he was very affected by another thing he saw at the exhibition, which was gamelan instruments, from Indonesia. And his first piece on the second half, The Pagodas, is all inspired by gamelan sounds. So Asia came to France in that period of time. And when you go to Ravel's house, he had an Asian room, and in his room, he had all these like little Chinese and Japanese teacups and paintings, and he would love bringing friends there and showing them everything and saying, regarde, everything is fake, it's so great. He would look at everything, this is like not real, but I love it. And he was really into that sort of Asian art stuff. But for the next two pieces, which I'm going to play, which are called both, strangely enough, they're both called Ondine. It's because Ondine was this myth, a mystical thing. She was kind of like a mermaid, like half woman, half fish. And she was evil. I mean, she would try to come out of the water and lure men to go with her to become the king of the seas, like a Neptune or something. I just want to say one thing. We ladies really don't get a break, right? I mean, we're always being portrayed as evil. I don't know why. Go Hillary, go Kamala. I just, It's just hopeless. Did you notice that, tornadoes and hurricanes are mostly ladies' names? Right? I'm onto this, right? So, Debussy saw a drawing by Arthur Rackham, and it was of this beautiful woman coming out of the water, and there were waves, and he was really entranced by that. Ravel was inspired not by a painting. He was inspired by a poem by Bertrand, Aloysius Bertrand, who wrote a triptych. These are poems from a collection called Gaspard de la Nuit, and Ravel really fell in love with this poem. He borrowed this book of poems from his friend Ricardo and never gave it back to him. And Ricardo mentions this in his letters, so clearly this really upset him. And then he emerged this incredible piece, Gaspard de la Nuit. So you're going to hear Ondine by Ravel from Gaspard de la Nuit, but the first Ondine will be by Debussy. So they're really different, but they do both make the women look pretty bad. So just kind of listen and see what you think. I would say what they have in common, obviously, is the badass women, but they also have the water. The water is a big feature. And Ravel's rendition of it is much, much longer and like about 5 times harder to play. But at the very end, you'll notice something amazing. Ondine comes out of the water and she reveals her whole body like this. And she tries one last time to get the mortal to go with her. And then all the pedal stops and you'll hear a very dry, very soft sound. And that's the mortal basically saying, honey, I'm not going with you. And then she gives up this huge, evil laugh and she disappears in the water. So here are the 2 Ondines by Debussy and Ravel.